Great. Thank you all for joining tonight. Let's go ahead and start as we usually do with a few prayers. Let me put those on the screen. Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And the mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And refuge in English first and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Partu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shod Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Partu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupal Shod. Let's do a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to focus our mind using the breath. Again, use whatever technique you prefer to use with the breath. We'll do that in silence for just a few minutes. And then I'll come in and I'll lead you in a reflection to set bodhicitta motivation. So we can begin the meditation now. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta for tonight's class. And in this final class, we're going to be looking at the perfection of wisdom in particular. This highest practice of the bodhisattva, at least in the sutra presentation. And it's, of course, incorporated even in the tantric teachings. This wisdom that is unique to Buddhism, the Buddha's own insight that all the enlightened beings of the past, present, and future generate in order to accomplish those supreme goals, the goals of one's own liberation as well as enlightenment. So when we turn our minds towards this topic, it is important that we have this motivation of bodhicitta to aim for the highest goal, the fulfillment of our deepest potential, our ability to fully awaken, so then we can skillfully guide all sentient beings to attaining all the realizations of the path, and especially the insight into emptiness that we ourselves have cultivated. So bring this motivation of bodhicitta to tonight's teachings in a very deep way, recognizing the preciousness of these teachings that are unique to Buddhism. It is the way out, is the means by which ourselves and all sentient beings can remove all the causes of our own dissatisfaction and suffering, and also remove all of what obscures us from becoming fully enlightened, achieving our deepest potential. Really set this motivation on the basis of that kind of highest goal for yourself and for all sentient beings, to achieve enlightenment so we can lead them to that same state. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So again, in last week's class, we did go through the perfection of concentration, which, as I mentioned, is also a rather detailed description in most Lamrim texts, where the Buddha shared, of course, all the techniques he learned from these great Hindu masters that he studied with, all these meditative techniques, beings who investigated how to deepen one's own concentration, to investigate things on the basis of that. And of course, in Buddhism, that's how we use the perfection of concentration. It's a support for developing this next perfection, the perfection of wisdom, the special insight into the nature of reality. Excuse me. So let me just share, I forgot to share at the end of last week's class the couple of slides with some quotes from Lama Zopa that I thought were kind of inspiring about, maybe we assess our own concentration in this way. I asked you to kind of take a look at your own concentration over the past week. But he said, at present, our concentration is incredibly weak and our understanding is incredibly shallow. Any subject we study is blurred by lack of insight and warped by our deluded thinking. And when we try to meditate on it, our meditation can rarely go to any depth because of our lack of concentration. But this will change. It gives us that optimistic view. Our progress will probably not be quick, but it will be definite if we keep at it. For now, we will slip off the object of our meditation and spend many wasted hours dreaming rather than meditating. But we will improve, finally getting to the stage where we can concentrate for hours without distraction. So again, this is really the goal of that fifth perfection, to develop the mind that is incredibly stable, can remain on the object of meditation for as long as we wish without any interruption or any distraction, and moreover can have this pliancy. Remember, we talked about that, this serviceability of body and mind that are really quite unique to attaining these higher levels of stabilization. So hopefully you were inspired somewhat by last week's talk, and again, use that to feed into your own meditation practice. It's important that we have, again, some continuity of practice as best as we can, and try to lengthen the amount of time that we can be in meditative concentration. It's really a way to look at it, to work with smaller increments of time and then elongate them as we feel more comfortable with being able to be primarily on the object for a good portion of the time. It's not that we're going to be perfect in our meditation right at the beginning, but as Rinpoche says, over time this will change. So tonight, the final topic, we have Tantra added on, is a bit of a footnote. I'll talk a little bit about Tantra at the end of tonight. But the last topic in the formal part of the Lam Rim, in terms of the sutra presentation, is the perfection of wisdom. This is, of course, again, the hardest of the six perfections in many ways because it does involve being able to investigate the nature of things and understand this very deep truth of emptiness, that things all lack inherent existence, and to get our heads around what that means and what have you, So let's go ahead and take a look at where we're at with the text and the outline. I'll put the slides back on. We again are in that final section before the conclusion, the path of the superior person, meaning the person of the greatest capacity, the greatly capable being, as Rinpoche would say. There were two sections within that. Talked about bodhicitta some time ago. Then we've been in this topic of training in the bodhisattva's conduct once you have developed bodhicitta. We're still in the first section of those, the manner of training in the general Mahayana, kind of, being able to look at the kind of general teachings that are given around practicing the six perfections and so on. And now we're going, and then tonight, later, we'll go into how to enter what's called here the adamantine vehicle, the diamond vehicle, tantric vehicle, different names for that. And again, we'll just have a brief bit on Tantra at the end of tonight. So in this first section on the general Mahayana, we went through the six perfections in a very overview kind of way. It's well worth investigating them in more depth. As I mentioned, Shantideva's text is a wonderful way, guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, to do that. We are going again to detail, as we did last week, on concentration and then tonight on wisdom, but the other perfections are explained rather nicely in that text. Other than generosity, there's not a lot on generosity there, but again, most Lamrim texts go into much more detail than I've been able to do in these teachings here on Essential Nectar. The four means of attraction, how we attract others so that they can benefit from the teachings. And then the teachings on quietude or calm abiding, the perfection of concentration. And then insight is what we'll be going into tonight. So the section on insight is divided into four main parts. I split the last one out, the one verse, I think in the outline Martin Wilson had, he kind of included it somewhere, I think, within Selflessness of Phenomena. But anyway, I think it's worth standing on its own. We're going to begin by talking about the root of samsara, understanding that what is at the very foundation of all of our suffering and keeping us from being unenlightened is this ignorance, grasping at inherent existence that we need to overcome. And then the two main phenomena that we discuss the selflessness of, or the emptiness of persons, because the person, the I, as well as other people, are grasped at in a way that really is a major part of our problem. But then we also have the same type of grasping with regard to all other phenomena besides persons. So we'll go into those two sections. And then how we bring together the quietude, the calm abiding that we generated in the fifth perfection with the insight that we're developing in the sixth perfection, and unite those two, the union of calm abiding and special insight. So I'll come back to that. You all saw that once before, but let's go to the text and begin our survey of the text. So actually, this is where we begin. Verse 394. Again, this is the introduction to this section by talking about the root of samsara. So our author says, if I thus realize samadhi, meditative stabilization of quietude or calm abiding, I must cut the root of ignorance and error by discriminating analysis of the meaning of selflessness while I abide in that samadhi. This is already pointing to the union of these two. The samadhi is the foundation, the support for generating the insight, the ability to unite that with the wisdom, seeing emptiness or selflessness. So, what is the cause through which I and all sentient beings, from beginningless time until the present, have circled in this state of samsara, afflicted uncontrollably by many hundreds of sufferings? And he's kind of asking, what is the main problem that we're talking about here? If this is what we have to do, what is it that we need to overcome? He says in 396, it is this. Though the minds of indifferent nature, first the thought arises that self and other and so forth exist independently and inherently. This is the big thing, again, that things have an inherent or independent existence. This is the misconception that's driving the whole show, the show of samsara that we've been engaged in since beginningless time. And he says, then through this appearance that self and other exist inherently, grow all defilements, such as attachment for self and hatred for others. Through these one heaps up karma and whirls like a firebrand round the realms of the six classes, whence comes this disturbance by suffering, like ripples on water. So he's kind of talking about the first two noble truths, essentially, that we have once more that root of ignorance from which all the other afflictions, delusions arise, our hatred, our attachment, our jealousy, greed, what have you. And then we engage in karma on the basis of those. And of course, that creates the experiences we have in samsara, our suffering. And even our virtuous states of mind are still rooted in that ignorance. So the good results we get within samsara are still not satisfactory. They're still tinged with this contamination of ignorance. So let's go back to the tree of samsara that was on the screen a short while ago and that we did look at when we were going through the stages of the path of the person of middling capacity. Remember that the root, the very bottom there, number one, is that ignorance that clings to the I and all phenomena to be truly or inherently existent. We're going to talk about that more as we go through tonight. But this is that belief in, conviction in, an I that has an ability to set itself up, to stand on its own, to be independently, inherently, substantially existent. So again, there are many ways to describe it, but it is really a part of almost all of our experience. And certainly things also even appear to exist that way. I'll talk about that a bit tonight as well. From that root of ignorance, we have the trunk of the tree, which includes both our wholesome and unwholesome thoughts that we cultivate within our ignorance. So whether we have a virtuous thought of being generous and kind, or whether we have a thought of wanting to harm somebody, take their property, what have you, these are the thoughts that are arising within ignorance. As long as we have that ignorance, we're not going to be free of the tree of samsara. We're not going to be creating results outside of the tree of samsara. And so we can get good, wholesome results from our actions and thoughts and what have you within samsara, but they are still, as I said, contaminated by that ignorance. So the third is the branches of karma, the virtuous and non-virtuous actions we create with their respective thoughts. So when we have a thought of kindness, compassion towards others, and we engage in an act of generosity, well, then we get a karma that is going to bring forth a positive result, which is the fruit of happiness that we experience from that type of karma. On the other hand, if we are miserly and jealous of others and we end up wanting to steal from them and we create that karma, we will end up with the suffering results of having our own resources depleted or what have you. So again, this is how samsara works. We have these three elements of our delusions, which includes ignorance and all of the other afflictions that arise on the basis of that. Then we have karma, and then we have the suffering that results from that. They often talk about, I think there's a verse from Nagarjuna that talks about these being like a firebrand that is spun in the darkness. Like if you've ever been out camping or something and you take a stick that's been in the fire and it's got a red hot end to it and you start twirling it in the air, it creates the illusion of a circle, right? Even though there's no real circle there, you're just creating the pattern of a circle with this whirling firebrand. And what Nagarjuna says is that these three elements, which are also encompassed in the 12 links of dependent arising, of delusions, afflictions, and then the karma that we create on the basis of that, and then the results that we get within samsara from those karmas, that all of that, they kind of like overlap each other. It becomes like a circle that we can't even really distinguish where one begins and the other ends. And as long as we're on this wheel of cyclic existence, continuing to be under the control of these factors, then we're just going to perpetuate our stay in samsara and never really know any real happiness. The happiness experiences that we have in samsara, as we saw back on the middle scope, are unsatisfactory. They don't really have the ability to ultimately satisfy. So again, this is all teachings that we've seen before, but just emphasizing in terms of our text that this is really the root problem. You know, And it says, whence comes this disturbance by suffering, like ripples on water? Our suffering arises from its causes, which are karma and delusions, afflictions, in particular the root of samsara, the ignorance. So it says there, therefore, in the end, the root of samsara is that all dharmas of samsara and nirvana are not grasped as mere conceptual imputations, but appear and are grasped as inherently existent. So this has got a lot to it, this verse, because this is essentially saying that what is going on with regard to this ignorance is that we are not seeing things as they actually exist, which is incredibly subtle. Yeah, we're going to go into that in a moment. And many of you have gone through these teachings before, but it always helps to go back through them again and again to refresh our memory and to work with trying to deepen our understanding. But this is essentially pointing to the teaching on dependent arising that the Buddha gave in terms of the ways in which things actually come into existence in a dependent manner. Therefore, they cannot have any independent existence. They cannot exist on their own. They aren't self instituting. They don't exist by way of their own characteristics. They aren't established on their own. They are established through various levels of dependent arising. And of course, we can also, while we go into that, talk about, how this whole process of ignorance arising comes into play. Let's take a look at these three levels of dependent arising. This is said to be, His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls this the slogan of the Buddha because this phrase is used, dependent arising, in all the Buddha's teachings. There's just differences in terms of what it really is alluding to. What is these deeper meanings of dependent arising? Everyone agrees in all the Buddhist traditions on the first one, dependence upon causes and conditions. And of course, this is really only those phenomena that arise on the basis of causes and conditions. Things like all the physical stuff in our world, our bodies, our minds, everything that is conditioned, that changes moment by moment, it's impermanent, arises from causes and conditions. And it has sometimes substantial causes that bring forth the main element of it, and then they have contributing conditions that also cause things to come into existence. We talk about a pot, for example, a clay pot. Maybe some of you have even done pottery and been at a wheel where you fashioned a clay pot and what have you. Well, the main cause of that clay pot is the clay from which the pot will be formed. But it obviously requires many other causes and conditions. It requires the water to moisten it so that it can be malleable, and it requires the wheel to spin it on, and then the potter to actually shape the pot, and so on. All the various other things involved, the kiln, the various uh, finishes and coats that are put on it to produce the pot and what have you. So there are many factors that go into it. And of course, all those factors have their causes and conditions. We can say that there are infinite causes and conditions in regard to anything that is produced. So nothing stands alone that is produced from causes and conditions. It's not able to do that. It depends upon those very causes and conditions for its existence. Again, all the lower Buddhist schools will say, well, yeah, that's not a problem. We all agree with that. But they don't think that that's pointing to the lack of inherent existence. But the Prasangika Madhyamaka, the consequence middle way school that we're studying in tonight's class, the final view of the middle way that the Buddha taught, this is what they hold, is that even the fact that things arise from causes and conditions means they cannot exist in an independent manner. As causes and conditions right there, if things depend upon anything, causes and conditions, they kind of gross as opposed to some of the ones that we're going to go into next. But this already points to the fact that things can't stand alone. They have no independent existence. And it's kind of puzzling when we look at the lower schools and wonder, well, why can't they see that? Well, again, we all, to some degree, are still holding to inherent existence as kind of like our safety net. Things have to exist in this manner, or else it all falls apart. If pots don't exist from their own side and people from their own side and what have you, then things can't exist at all. And that's, of course, how the other schools look at Prasangika Madhyamaka, that we've gone off the deep end and are negating things existing at all. Well, things do exist. That's what we're getting into with this reasoning of dependent arising. When we look at these three levels, we're establishing how things actually exist. They exist, first of all, all those that are conditioned in dependence upon the causes and conditions that brought them about. Let's go to the second one. The second one applies to all phenomena, whether things are arising from causes and conditions or not, because there are some phenomena that are not caused, that actually are permanent phenomena. And that's dependence upon parts. But let's still continue to talk about things that have causes and conditions in regard to this. So if we talk about a pot, if I had a clay pot here, of course, there would be the rim of the pot, and there'd be the sides of the pot and the bottom of the pot, and then the inside walls of the pot, and so on. And then, of course, if we go beyond the grosser level of just what we see, we can start to go into all of the molecules that make up the pot and the things that make up the molecules and the more subtle elements that make up those, all the way down to whatever scientists have gotten to now in their micro version of or vision of things, how things exist at a very deep level, quarks and subquarks, and I don't know where they're at this point. But you find that everything depends upon parts. In a physical manner, those things that are physical, they do have physical parts that make them up, like the parts of your car, or the parts of your house, or the parts of a book, or whatever it is that you're looking at. But then, of course, things that don't have physical nature, such as our consciousness, we could talk about temporal parts, or even dividing up parts that exist within our consciousness, such as our six consciousnesses, our five sense consciousnesses, and our mental consciousness, or our minds, the main minds, and then the mental factors that arise within them, all these various ways that we can parse up mind. But we see that there is nothing that doesn't have parts. It either has parts that are involved in the essence of that, or they have parts that are temporally designated. Everything has parts. So can there be a whole, such as mind, without all the various parts, the six consciousnesses that make up mind, the minds and mental factors that constitute the basis for mind? Nothing can exist as a whole that's independent of the parts that that whole relates to. Car and all the parts of a car, you know, pot and all the parts of a pot. So this is how everything exists as well, is independence upon parts. Things cannot exist as a whole without those parts. The last one, put it back on the screen real briefly, but you all know this one, and it was even in our verse, the fact that things depend, everything that exists depends upon imputation or designation. In our text, I think it's a conceptual imputations. They are mere conceptual imputations, meaning that there is a base, such as the parts of a car, but in the end, the way that that car exists is as a designation and imputation to all those parts. So we have all these parts that are assembled in a car factory, and you go to the lot to buy a new car or a used car or whatever car you're going to get, and you see all those parts, and it's speaking to you as if it's a car. It's saying this is a car. Well, car, there's no real car there, because car is only a label that we put on these collection of parts that we end up calling a car. We all agree to call it a car, and it performs the function of a car. If you try to drive it off the lot and it doesn't perform the function of a car, well, then you're not going to buy it, right? So the idea is that when we investigate at the deepest level, we see that everything that exists has a basis, something that is the stuff that we are going to give a label to. And then we have the actual label that we give to it, the designation, the imputation that we make on the basis of that label. And these are actually two separate phenomena, the label we give to something and the basis upon which that label can be designated properly. But there's nothing from the side of that stuff, that basis of designation, that makes it into what we are labeling. We are giving that label on the basis of our conventional agreement, that based on putting all these various parts together, having the engine and the wheels and the steering wheel and the seats and the whatever, all the various parts of the car, then we are going to designate it as car because it fulfills the function of car for us. It has a carness that we are giving it, no carness from the side of those parts. It's the same for people, the same for bodies, the same for everything that exists, same for our minds. Everything is a mere conceptual imputation, a mere designation. So the reasoning of dependent arising is often approached initially, at least I like to use it as the initial way of introducing the topic of emptiness, because it helps to establish how things actually do exist. As I said, all those lower schools, they look at the Personae Comediamicas and they think we've gone loony. We're just saying things don't exist at all. Well, things do exist. But as we can see, the coarsest level of parts dependence upon, causes and conditions, then the next subtlest level of dependence upon parts, and finally, the subtlest level of dependence upon just being designated. You have a basis, and we're just simply giving a name to that. We're thinking of it in that way, imputing that identity on that collection of stuff. So this is, again, extremely subtle. Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always say, it's almost as if things don't exist, because it's very, very slight. When we start applying this to ourselves, which we're going to do in a moment when we get into the reasoning of that just discerns the selflessness of persons, especially the I that we are so attached to in this life, it's kind of weird to think that we are nothing more than a mere designation. Of course, there's a basis that's being designated, but even when we go into investigating that basis, we find that none of those elements of that basis have any inherent existence either. They're also all merely designated. This is the way that we get to this realization is by understanding that all phenomena, not just the I, which is where we usually start, but everything that exists, as our author of the text here does, investigates bodies, investigates minds, investigates other phenomena. You can get rid of that concept of things having any independent inherent existence in a similar manner, because everything exists through mere imputation. There's nothing more than that. Anything more than that is to be negated. And this is what we are doing in this reasoning, is negating the grosser ways that we are holding to things, but to understand that even to hold that anything has any existence beyond conceptual imputation is an error that we're making. So as I said, we might wonder, well, how do we make this error? And how do we get involved in this? The Buddha never set out, well, where did our original ignorance come from? Because there is no such thing really as original ignorance, like the first moment of ignorance. We've always had ignorance because we've always had minds. Our minds have no beginning, our ignorance has no beginning. But the process by which we buy into this ignorance is quite interesting. And one of the books from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, I think it's Virtue and Reality, Lama Zopa sets out this process by which we get into this trouble of samsara and being unenlightened through the force of following our ignorance. How we grasp at that inherent existence, Lama Zopa says, we start with the basis of the object appearing, and we label it as that object. So say again that you have something like I'll use my little wrist mala that I have here, right? The basis appeared to you now. It's right there in front of the camera. Okay, and we know this type of object. Some people who are not Buddhists may not know what this is, may think it's just like a little bracelet or worry beads. I remember somebody thinking they were worry beads, these things they use in Greece, I think. I don't know what tradition they come from, but they kind of go through them as they think about their worries or what have you. I don't know. So anyway, if you know the label for this, or you hear the label for it, maybe the first time that you ever saw a wrist mala, then the base appears to you and you go, oh, wrist mala. And if you stop right there, everything would be fine, actually. If you just left it at the mere labeling, okay, this stuff that's in my hand is being labeled as wrist mala. Well, it's not going to stop there, because unfortunately, we've had this ignorance that grasps at something more than being merely labeled since beginningless time. And this has put imprints on our mind that cause a false appearance. So this is what Rinpoche says is the very next step in this process. We have this object appearing to exist from its own side. It's a false appearance. Now, that's not happening out there on the object. That's happening in our own minds, because these imprints arise in the form of this distortion, this appearance as if what I'm holding in front of you here, as if this has wrist maleness from its own side, that it is actually existing out here. It's like we got the label in the first step, but then the label seems to merge into the basis, and it's all out there now. It's all self-established. It's got its own wrist maleness, its own identity, independently there, not dependent upon me labeling it as wrist mala. And of course, this happens throughout our lives as we first learn what things are. Chair, table, mommy, daddy, dog, cat, whatever. We learn all these various labels. And this process takes over. We label it, we learn the label from someone, a book or a person or whatever. And then the object appears to have that identity from its own side. It appears to be self established. So, of course, why wouldn't we buy into it then? If it's appearing that way, well, we're not, most people don't question appearances. Most people think how things appear and how they exist are perfectly fine. They're all in sync. That's the problem because we assent to that appearance. That's what Lama Zopa Rinpoche says is the third part of the process of our ignorance arising. Our ignorance assents to that false appearance. Again, the basis appears and we learn the label. We kind of label it as that. Then it appears to exist from its own side as if the label and the object are one. It's got that, whatever it's being labeled as, that is existing out there in the object. And then we agree to that false appearance. As I said, why wouldn't we? This is why the first step is to undermine that ignorance. We aren't going to be able to get rid of the false appearance right away. The false appearance is actually said to be the very last thing that we remove on the path because it's the subtlest imprint that we have in our mind that is causing that distortion, that dualistic view of things existing on their own out there. But if you overcome the ignorance, then you no longer believe in it. Now, then you no longer agree or assent to that way that things appear because you know better. You've done the investigation and you actually have come to understand that things lack that way of appearing. It's kind of like I use this example frequently, and I'm sure I've used it with every one of you, no doubt, in the past, but it's like the example of a dream. Now, again, I know my own dreams. I don't know any of your dreams. I don't have clairvoyance to know your dreams. Maybe that's a good thing. but, the idea is that when I'm dreaming, I'm totally caught up in my dream reality, right? The objects, the things that are appearing in my dream are as if they're real, meaning as real as my waking life. I won't be able to discern that this is just a dream state that I am in. There's a false appearance there. Things are appearing and I'm identifying what they are, but they're appearing to be real in the same way that my waking life is real. And I buy into it. And on the basis of that, I have emotions arising. I might get very attached to something in my dream. I might get frightened or angry at something in my dream. But those are just appearances. There's nothing real to them. They're a false appearance. They're a dream appearance. And how do I know that? Because when I wake up, those objects aren't in my room with me there. Whatever I was dreaming about was all just a dream image, a dream appearance. It's not identical completely to what we're experiencing in our waking life, but nonetheless, it gives us an idea, a flavor for how something can appear so real and yet be a mere appearance. It's not appearing or existing in the way that it appears at all. This is what's happening to us all the time. And it's happening in our dreams too, because we even think our dream objects are inherently existent. We are not just attributing conventional existence to them, we're attributing, a, a deeper form of existence that doesn't exist at all. We're doing this with regard to everything. Everything appears to exist that way. And as Rinpoche says, we agree to that. We assent to that. We don't even question it. So the first step is to undermine that ignorance. And then, of course, over time, as we deepen our understanding and insight into emptiness, it will eventually help us to remove these subtle imprints that are causing this distortion, this false appearance. That is actually what is the final obstruction that you need to remove to become a Buddha. What we often call the obstructions to omniscience or knowledge obstructions. To just be free from samsara, you have to get rid of this ignorance because that's the root, again, that's keeping you in that tree of samsara. But to go beyond that to enlightenment, you have to remove these subtler imprints that are causing you to not be able to know all phenomena at the same time completely, to have that omniscient mind of a Buddha. So I wanted to introduce you to those two concepts while we're in this section of ignorance and how ignorance arises and how it doesn't see things in the way that they actually exist, which is as dependent arisings, in the subtlest manner as merely imputed, as merely designated by our conceptual mind. And by conceptual mind, this is really just thoughts that we're having, though we put language to them, right? We call this a wrist mala, and we call that a pot and a computer and whatever else, all the various phenomena that we give labels to. And there's language involved in that, but we're not talking about mere linguistics. We're talking about the concepts, the way that our conceptual mind gives an identity to everything in our world. I've never heard a Tibetan Buddhist teacher use this language, but I used it once with one of the teaching assistant over in the master's program, Jumpa Gendon, and he thought it was sounded okay. I said, it's like we organize our world through our conceptual mind. And this is true, right? This is this, that is that. We learn from a very young age, as I said, all the various things that are in our world, what they are, how to identify with them, how to relate, or how to identify them, and how to relate to others on the basis of those identities. But then we think that the world is already organized that way, that we're just kind of coming to see it that way. And that's what happens to every one of us as we learn what things are in our world and even new things that appear in our world. When the iPad appeared, I mean, there was no such phenomenon as an iPad before Apple designed this device and, gave the ability for it to serve a particular function and have this name being given to it and what have you. We learn new phenomena all the time, but they all still appear to us, even if they're brand new, as if they have that identity from their own side, as if they're organized that way already. And this is the big mistake that we're making. We're not seeing that things actually have a very, very subtle way of existing. And if we begin to undermine that ignorance and we begin to see things more correctly, and eventually we can uproot that ignorance with deep insight into emptiness. So the rest of what we have in terms of this section, or most of what we have in the rest of this section, is about how do we discern that emptiness. The reasoning of dependent arising is very powerful, because if we do get to understanding this very subtle way that things exist, it completely flies in the face of how things actually, are held by this ignorance. The way that we think things have an independent, concrete existence, that cannot be upheld if things are dependent arising. So dependent arising is a nice one to start with, and it's also a nice one to keep coming back to remind ourselves that it's not that we're saying things don't exist at all, that this is just, pea soup and there's just no, it's all, without any distinguishing characteristics, it's all, nothing. There are distinguishing characteristics, but those too are imputed. There are phenomena, everything is merely imputed. So we have to remind ourselves constantly that this is what the Buddha is saying. He's not saying things don't exist at all. He's saying things don't exist in this very mistaken way, and how they actually exist is incredibly subtle. All these levels of dependent arising, but the deepest, the most profound understanding is that it's all merely designated, merely imputed. So let's go ahead and go back to our text then. First, I want to introduce you to, what do I want to introduce you to something more in here? Selflessness of persons. Okay, yeah, this is where we're going to next. This is starting with verse 399. Yep, that's where we're at the text. We're going to first go through the 4 steps of this, what's often called the 4-point analysis. This is used in many ways to investigate the person, the I in particular. We do this with regard to all people. Of course, we have the same mistaken ignorance with regard to all phenomena, but nonetheless, we usually start with the I, the person that we identify with. And we go through the 4 steps of identifying the object of negation, determining the possibilities for how that would exist if it did exist. Of course, we're trying to negate it, but we have to find out, what are the realms of possibilities for it to actually exist so that we can then deny its existence. And then we go through the 2 steps of analyzing on the basis of those possibilities. The first, the possibility of sameness, or kind of things being one, and then the analysis for difference, that something is other than that. And we'll go into this in regard to the I in more detail, but also talk about some of the other phenomena that our author investigates. And then, of course, get to the conclusion. So I think most of you are familiar with this 4-point analysis. It's a really very powerful way to get to that conclusion of emptiness. As I said, we start usually with the I. And that's because that is the main driving force behind that tree of samsara. Yes, we cling to malas and pots and all this other phenomena as existing inherently as well. But the big one that we revolve around is this sense of I, right? Because when we think I, well, then everything gets seen through the lens of how do things satisfy that I, please that I, help that I to have the happiness it seeks, versus what are the things that are in the way of that I, that cause harm to that I, suffering to that I. When we come to understand that the I doesn't exist in the way that we think it does, well, then that mechanism stops manifesting. We no longer are concerned about something that doesn't exist. And the mere I, the merely imputed I, doesn't involve that level of investment that the mind of ignorance puts into all of that and all the other delusions. That's why once we remove ignorance, all the other delusions of attachment and anger and so on can't arise. And particularly when we see it in regard to this I, well, then we've dismantled the main way in which we get caught up in stuff in samsara, the main way in which we create the other afflictions and the karma on the basis of that, and then experience all of that. Yes, our holding to other things as inherently existing is part of the problem, but the main problem is this one right here, this I that we are grasping at, so much of our day, thinking it exists in reality, trying to please it, trying to protect it, and it doesn't exist in the way that we think it does at all. So let's look at how this is introduced in verse 399. Maybe I'll read 398 one more time. It says, therefore, in the end, the root of samsara is that all dharmas, all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are not grasped as mere conceptual imputations, but appear and are grasped as inherently existent. So grasped is kind of a weird use of that word in the third line. They are not seen as mere conceptual imputations. They're not, truly known as conceptual imputations, but rather they appear and are grasped as inherently existent. They appear that way, and we grasp at them that way. So let's go to the first verse in this that is all about the first step of that 4-point analysis. Therefore, the object appearing as an I existing inherently, not a mere imputation of I upon the collection of one's body and mind, is called the object of negation. The very first step is identifying that object of negation. All the great masters of the Tibetan tradition say that if you do this correctly, if you get this first point correct, the rest of it is a breeze, and the rest of the analysis will fall right into place. That we have to spend some time investigating this. It sounds so weird because, again, this is in a good part of our lives. I think Lama Tsongkhapa does say that there are some times during our day where we're not grasping so tightly at an inherently existent I, but most of the time we think that there's a real I here. That's the language Rinpoche would often use. He would say, the real I. Because the way we think of reality is that fiction, is that false way of things being perceived and known. So again, that is what we're trying to identify in this first step. And remember, the advice that's often given is to try to think of times when we've been particularly protective of that I. Maybe we've been falsely accused, or there's some danger that's coming up and we have this strong grasping at, oh, this can't happen to me. Something where the I seems to rear its ugly head a bit more. It can be there in a very subtle way too. I'm not denying that. But when it becomes more pronounced, it's easier to see how we grasp at that sense of an I. It can also be there with some positive emotions or, things of great elation or what have you. But I think it's often really useful to look at, well, what about times when someone has accused us of doing something we didn't do, or when there's been some threat to our sense of being and our sense of who we are? And we can see that it rises really quite strongly at that time. Might even seem like it's got some sort of physical place in our body where it is. Sometimes it appears really kind of right here in the center of our chest if you kind of investigate that strong sense of an I that needs to be defended at those times. Now, when you bring that to mind, we're not trying to recreate all the emotion around that, and to get totally upset at what occurred, when that particular incident happened. The idea is to get really clear about how the I appears then. How does it appear? It appears very solid, self-existent, like there's something real that is the I that's here. That's why Rinpoche says it's the real I. Oftentimes that isn't even really being closely identified to being either the body or the mind. It's this sense of it being real, existing on its own, self-established. That's what we're trying to identify in this first step. And you can work really hard at that first step to get to that place where you really have a clear view of what it is that we're trying to negate. But if you don't have a clear view of that, then the rest of the analysis is going to fall somewhat flat, because we'll end up looking for something that isn't really the object that we want to negate. What is running the show is the ignorance that is grasping at that sense of an I, or that sense of an identity to any phenomenon. we have to uproot that by getting to see that the object it's holding to doesn't exist. Going back to, the dream analogy, like if you had somebody, a child, sometimes children get really afraid of their dreams, right? Because they really believe that the dream objects that were appearing, especially if they were nightmares or things like that, that those things are real. They might even be afraid to go to bed at night, thinking, oh, I don't want to go back into that dream place and whatever and have that horrid experience. So you see, this is a similar thing. We are buying into that and thinking that stuff is real. In order to undermine all of what we're engaged in, we have to see that that object that we're afraid of, or that we're following, or that we're attached to, or whatever, that isn't real. Once we pull the ground out from underneath that, well, then there's nothing there. There's nothing to grasp at. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be attached to. Just like with a child, you want to be able to help them to get to a place where they see that that is just a dream appearance. It's nothing to be afraid of. So this is the idea behind this. If we identify the object of negation very clearly, then when we uproot it, it will have a profound effect, because we'll actually see, wow, this illusion that I've been living with, following this sense of an I that I think is so concrete and real, it doesn't exist at all. And it deflates the entire thing, pulls the rug out from underneath you. That's the point of this. That's the place we want to get to by the time we get through the remaining steps. So the very first step we do have to put some time into. We do actually have to investigate how that I appears, how it actually is being held by that mind of ignorance, that false appearance. It's around us all the time. As Rinpoche said, that's what happens. Everything appears to inherently exist on the basis of those subtle imprints. So really just open our eyes, we can see it all around us. Now, the second step is determining the possibilities. So this is in verse 400. It says, if that I did exist in accord with that mode of appearance. In other words, if it did have inherent existence, that means that it would be findable. It would be something that we could actually locate and say, there it is. There's the real I. It will have a true referent, as they often say, something that is the actual I then. Well, that I would have to exist as either one with or separate from body and mind. They hyphenated that. We often call it the mind-body complex, this collection of stuff that is the mind and body. It's either going to be one with that or separate from that. For apart from these, there is no third alternative mode of existence. The second step is important insofar as delimiting the possibilities, saying, okay, if this I exists in the way that my ignorance is grasping at it, in the way that it appears to exist, well, where will I look for it to either have the ability to find it and once and for all know that it's real, or to not find it and once and for all know that it's not real? This is what we have to get to in the second step, is determining the possible places or ways that we could locate that real I. Well, the most natural one that we would think would be affiliated with the I is if it's the same as one with the mind and the body, right? Because we have a strong sense of the I being here where the mind and the body is. I always point out to people, you don't feel like you're in some other room in your place when you're sitting here in front of the screen in whatever room you're in right now, right? We don't have a sense of an I being somewhere else beyond where the mind and the body are. So the most likely possibility is that possibility that it's going to be here together with or the same as the mind and the body. But we have to include the other possibility. And the Buddha included this particularly because in the Hindu traditions, the Vedic traditions that existed at the time and of the Buddha's awakening and what have you, they believed in what's called an Atman. Atman is often defined as soul. I don't know if it's equivalent to what we mean by soul in some of the Western traditions. But the idea is that is something that is who you are, the essence of your being, that is not the body and the mind, that is an independent phenomenon that would be totally separate from the body and the mind. And I think that's how actually Christians talk about soul, that it's not your body and it's not your mind. It's some sort of essence of divine being that is united with God in heaven or sent to eternal damnation in hell or what have you. So a soul or an Atman is the sort of flavor we're looking for in regard to this other possibility, something that is completely separate from the body and the mind. Again, we don't have this as a natural sense. And in fact, Lama Tsongkhapa says that even to have this as something you're holding to is something you acquire through other people telling you about it. I don't think that I would have thought that there was a soul here unless I grew up in a Catholic tradition where I was taught about my immortal soul. And the same would be for an Atman. These are traditions that give teachings that instill the idea of an I, a sense of a person that is completely independent of the body and the mind. But we have to remove that possibility as well, that somehow the I could be completely apart from the body and mind. Now, as was said in our verse, is there a third possibility? If I say Don is either in Santa Fe or not in Santa Fe, well, if Don exists, he's going to be in one of those two places. Not in Santa Fe is a pretty big realm of possibility, right? I could be in Missoula, I could be in San Francisco, I could be in Spain, I could be all over the world, right? Could be up, in the space station, floating around the Earth. I could be many different places. But those are the two possibilities. Is there a third possibility of Don being somewhere if he's not here or not here? You know what I'm saying. Anyway, here or not here are the two possibilities. There's no third possibility. So this is the importance of the second step, is to really, limit where we can actually go to try to find if this real sense of an I that we identified in the first step exists or not. If it exists in the way that it appears, well, then it's either going to be found somewhere in this collection of stuff, the body and mind, or it's going to be found completely apart from it. The last two steps are really just looking in those two places. Let's go through what our text says, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Just know that you can also certainly do an analysis where you're kind of picking apart these, the body and the mind, and trying to locate this sense of an I. But the way that it's approached in our text is a little bit more in terms of the consequences of what happens if you do find something on the body and mind, that basis, that is the real I. So in verse 401, if it, the inherently existent I, exists as one, meaning one with the body or mind or the body-mind complex, then as body and mind are two, right? Body and mind, they're not the same thing. We can identify what is the body and what is the mind. Well, then so that I will be two separate continua. Or just as the I is single, so too the body and mind will be a partless unity, which doesn't make sense, right? Because we think of the body as being physical, material, the mind as being non-material. These are two different phenomena that we've identified, and they aren't one. So if there is a single I here, well, then there must be a single basis, the body and mind, that are the equivalent to that I. But as we saw in the first two lines, because body and mind are actually two, well, then we must have two different I's. And we have the I that is the body and the I that is the mind, but that doesn't happen to us either, right? We don't think that way or feel that way, that I've got two different I's here. I mean, not the two I's in my head. The capital I that is my body, the capital I that is my mind. Going on to 402, and if the body and mind, that body-mind complex, are one with the I, they must be one without any divisions at all. Therefore, expressions dividing them separately, my body and my mind, are inadmissible, right? Because they would be one. You wouldn't be able to divide anything and think my body and my mind, because the I and the mind-body complex are all one. They're all the same phenomenon. Therefore, since there are many other faults too, if I and body and mind exist as one, that self or I does not exist as one entity with the mind and body pair. This is kind of a different way of setting out this analysis to some degree. Oftentimes, as I said, what we do is we can investigate either of those two and come to understand that the I cannot be found to be something in the body. You can even do that kind of physical investigation. Is there some part of the body that is the real I? And remember, it has to be, then that is the unitary phenomenon that is equivalent to the I. When we think I, that is the only thing that can be the I. And it is one indivisibly. So we can't think heart or mind or body or whatever and think I and have them be separate thoughts. They or would be united. They would be one. When we say I, that's what we're referring to. That's the true referent of the I. This third step is all about investigating to see if there's anything on the basis of the body or the mind that can be found to be the real I. And it has to be the real I in that unitary sense, right? We have a sense of a unitary I, and it also has to be indivisibly that phenomenon, that I. So it becomes one. And there's nothing that we can find that is that. We might think the mind is the closest thing, right? Because there is a continuity to mind from life to life. And that's why many people in the lower Buddhist schools will hold that the mind and mental consciousness, some element of consciousness, is the real I. But there is no real I that is identifiable completely with that, because once more, that would mean that that's the only thing that is the I. We would never identify the I with the body, never identify the I with other consciousnesses, and so on. So all of it, logically, we can see doesn't make sense, that there is this unitary phenomenon that is the real I, and that there is something on this basis that is the true referent of that, that is the equivalent of that. That's how the I would be inherently existent, is we would find something that is it, that sets itself up as that. Again, we go back to the reasoning of dependent arising. We see that this supports the idea that this I is merely labeled, merely designated to this. This collection of body and mind are the basis for designating I. I is the label we give to that. You can't find the merely labeled I, and of course you can't find anything more than the I being merely labeled. It can't have any inherent or substantial existence when we investigate this mind-body complex and go looking for that real I. The fourth step is to say, okay, then is it possible that this I is something completely separate from the mind and body in a manner of the Atman or soul or what have you? Let's go ahead and look at the text and see what our author says about that. There's only one verse for that, and that's verse 404. He says here, if you say it exists as separate from body and mind, then you would have to be able to say individually, this is my mind, this is my body, and this is my I. Right? You'd have three unique things there. We already talked about body and mind having some uniqueness, right? Mind is non-material. Body is the material physical form that we have, that matter. And we have the I. We'd have this third thing that is there that is completely separate, completely isolated from body and mind. This can't be done, so it doesn't exist as separate. What I often encourage people to do is even just do a little imaginary meditation where you take your mind and body off the cushion where you're sitting right now. Take your mind and body and imagine them being set aside. Well, is the I remaining on the cushion? Is there some third thing that is the I that is kind of there? Oh, you found me. I'm what's left over when you take away the body and the mind. Of course, there are many other faults of this. If you had this sense of the body and mind in a separate I, well, then how could the I be related to anything that happens to the body or mind? Right? Because it's not involved in the body. It's completely separate. What the I experiences and what the body or mind experiences would be two different things. So there are many faults with these. You can go through the consequences, but you can even, as I said, do that analysis, just setting aside the body and mind. Is there something left over that is the I? Having done this analysis, having found that we are looking for a particular way that the I exists as something findable, inherently there, identifiable from its own side, we determine the possibilities, either being the same as the body-mind complex or completely apart from, separate from it. We look in the first place, we look in the second place, we don't find it. Well, because there were only two possibilities, there's nowhere else to look. You have gotten to a place where you have negated it. That object of negation has been negated. What we are grasping at through our ignorance and the way things appear to us are false. This is how we undermine our ignorance, through this repeated analysis in this way. Now, the Buddha taught many other analyses as well. The only one that is really being investigated in our text is this 4-point analysis. We're going to see the author using this to investigate other phenomena. As I said, we usually use this to investigate the I because it's very effective. Really gets you to that place of recognizing that this strong sense of an I, again, that does appear frequently in our lives, but is also there in subtler ways as we go about our lives. And that's not real at all. We've been following an illusion. We've been following a misconception. And then we begin to let go of some of that bit by bit until we get to a deeper realization where we actually begin the process of removing that ignorance layer by layer. This is the technique that's being used here. As I said, the Buddha taught many other techniques. Won't go into those tonight, but that is how we actually come to discern the wisdom of emptiness. And I don't know if I didn't share the conclusion yet. Let's go back to the text. I think there's one more verse that is the conclusion. That's 405. So let's go to that verse. Therefore, since that I, that sense of an I, does not exist, either one with or separate from the mind-body pair, the I comes from the collection of body and mind and does not exist truly. It is like an illusion. In this word, phrase, the I comes from the collection of body and mind. I think he said it better in the previous, where it says that the I, there it says, not a mere imputation of I upon the collection of one's body and mind. So when we come to see through this analysis that that's the only way the I can exist, as a mere imputation of I upon the collection of body and mind. That's, I think, what he's trying to refer to here, that we see the I comes from the collection of body and mind. You have this basis and there's a designation of I. That's the only thing that is existing, is the I that is imputed to that basis. And it does not exist truly then. It's like an illusion. It has this way of appearing that is not in accord with how it actually exists. So we're going to go on then. We won't go through this in as great a detail because once you've gotten the technique with regard to the I, you can do it pretty readily for other phenomena. In this section on the selflessness of phenomena, meaning phenomena other than persons, we're going to look at the body in a few verses. Then we're going to look at the mind. And then he's going to go into a bit on the selflessness of all dharmas. And this gets into a reiteration of this final view of the middle way. Well, it's kind of a nice section, but let's go through the next two sections. As I said, we won't spend as much time on them because we're running out of time actually too. So let's see, verse 406. Let me first get this down. Oops, I need to go that quickly. 406. Likewise, the so-called body, which appears to exist inherently, not as a mere imputation, on this heap of flesh and bones and set of 5 limbs, is an object of negation, just seeming true. If it did exist in accord with that mode of appearance, that body and its parts would have to exist either as one or else as separate, for there is no other way they could exist. So that's the second step. The first one was identifying the object of negation, then looking at the possibilities. Then the first possibility, that's the third step. If they existed as one with the parts of the body, then since that body has many parts, such as the head, it too would be many, just like we saw the I that we are imputing on the body and mind, because there are the body and mind, well, then we say there are 2 eyes, right? Or else, since the body is one, its many parts would also be a partless unity, both of which don't make any sense, right? It can be logically refuted. If they existed as separate, if the body was here and the body's parts were completely separate, then in what was left when all the separate parts, such as arms and legs, were removed, that body would have to be found. Since it can't be, the body's a mere imputation upon its collection of parts and therefore doesn't exist inherently. You come to the same conclusion. So we can do this with regard to the I, with regard to the body, and then he goes on to talk about it with regard to the mind. For the mind, too, the mode of appearance of the object negated is that the mind of, I think in the original text it was Devadatta. I don't know why he changed it to Mr. Smith. I guess wanted to be more westernized. I don't know. I'll use Devadatta. The mind, too, the mode of appearance of the object negated is that the mind of Devadatta appears to exist from its own side, not merely imputed upon Devadatta's mind's past and future parts. If it did so exist, then Devadatta's own mind and the past and future parts of his mind would exist either as one or else as separate, for there is no other way that they could exist. That's again the second step. Then to look at whether they exist as one. Do the states of mind, past, present, and future, whatever, or even the various levels of consciousness, if they existed as one, since those parts are multiple, it would follow that the mind too is multiple. You'd have the mind of the past, the mind of the future, the mind of the present, all three being different minds. Or as the mind is one, so its past and future parts would be a partless unity, which we also know is not true. Future moments of mind, past moments of mind, present moments of mind, they are distinguishable. They aren't a partless unity. And then the fourth step, when they exist as separate, then after the parts, that mind's past and future moments are removed, one would have to be able to show such a mind. Ah, there it is. Aside from the parts, it's completely independent, separate. But since one cannot, that so-called mind also is merely imputed upon its parts, past and future. So once again, he goes back to this idea of things being merely imputed to connect it with the reasoning of dependent arising and to establish that things still do exist, albeit in a very subtle way. So then verse 414 is the single verse that's given to kind of setting out that all phenomena are also empty of inherent existence in a similar manner. And then he goes on to describe the conclusion that we come to in a sense on the basis of all of this. It says, just as when eye and body and mind are analyzed, as we did above, with these 4 points, they all lack inherent existence. So when all dharmas, the dharmas here uses a word equivalent to phenomena, when all phenomena, whether conditioned or unconditioned, are analyzed thus, they are seen to be like space. Space-like is the idea of things not being able to be found in that concrete way. So it's not meaning that space is equivalent to emptiness. It's an analogy. So the verse 415 and 416 is kind of getting into refuting that things exist in this concrete way that we think they do, that they appear to. In short, every phenomenon of samsara or nirvana is only a name and conceptual imputation. There is no dharma or phenomena existing from its own side upon that object itself, not even an atom. Well, if no dharmas exist from their own side, what kind of mode of existence do they have? They exist in the manner of dreams, illusions, echoes, or moons in water appearing but empty of essence. This is kind of again pointing to the fact that things don't have this concrete way of existing that our ignorance is adhering to. This is what this whole technique was to get us to the conclusion. This false way of existing, holding on to things over here, we pull away from that, thinking they don't exist that way at all. But the danger is, as we're going to see in the next 2 verses, that you could fall into this kind of nihilistic bent, thinking, as I've been pointing out through tonight, that things don't exist at all. He's already kind of helping us to counter both of those, but primarily kind of getting away from the concrete way that we think everything exists to seeing that they are quite illusory. There's nothing really true to the way that they appear. They exist in a way that is contrary to how they appear to us. They appear to be real and solid from their own side, but they're like an illusion, like a mirage that appears to be water that can be negated as being water by just examining it up close. There's no actual water there out on the horizon where we thought there was a water on the basis of that mirage. So this is pointing us to the middle way, and we kind of look at negating the other side, the kind of nihilistic view that things don't exist in the next 2 verses. He says, yet this does not mean that all dharmas do not exist at all. For example, the echo. We've all experienced an echo in some sort of a echo chamber or what have you. It arises when all its causes assemble. Although on analysis, one cannot find the echo. Still, it's not non-existent. It still comes into existence. Just so, when their respective conditions assemble, dharmas, phenomena, appear as such and such. When examined with the logic of ultimate analysis, they nowhere exist, but they're not non-existent totally. So the idea is that this is how we get to what we call the middle way. And we see that right now we're over in this extreme. Like we really think everything is real, the way it appears. And we begin this process of investigating to question that, and we start moving away from that. But there is this tendency sometimes when we start negating inherent existence to think it negates all manner of existence. Then we fall over here into this nihilistic bent. These two extremes, existence and non existence, existing inherently, not existing at all, are what we have to kind of move between until we find that perfect middle way where we can establish things don't exist inherently independently like we thought they did, but they do exist still in a dependent manner. That's why these two techniques are really useful. And the way he presents them are quite nice. And we go through the analysis and get to that emptiness that things don't have this way of existing. But then they're established through dependent arising as mere imputations. They still do exist. The I exists, you exist, everyone exists, everything exists that we are designating through our conventional thoughts and language, but they don't exist inherently. That's the true middle way. That's what we talk about in the next two verses, establishing the middle way that the Buddha taught in regard to this view of emptiness. Verses 4, 19, and 20. That which is seen when analyzed not to exist is seen not to exist truly, but is not seen not to exist at all. Conventional existence exist, like the echo, but are not truly existent. So, seeing all dharmas are space-like when analyzed with the logic that tests the deep meaning, and at the same time being certain they utterly fit the workings of dependent arising, is the ultimate view. So what he's saying in 420 is when we analyze and we get to that deep meaning of emptiness, that things lack inherent existence, but yet they are dependent arising. That's the middle way view. That's the final view that we want to aim for. And this is a really important point. Lama Tsongkhapa, spent a lot of time teaching on dependent arising and reiterating that this is the way to assure that our view of emptiness is correct. Because if it falls into this territory of denying the existence of things, then there is no karma, there's no person, there's no Buddha, there's no nothing. Everything has been negated, and nothing will really make any sense. We have to make sure we negate that layer of inherent existence that we've been putting on everything and not negate mere existence. And when we understand what is meant by mere existence through those levels of dependent arising, then we'll be able to hold that view that is totally fine. Kind of the one side understanding the dependent arising, the other side understanding their emptiness of inherent existence. So then we have the post-meditation verses that give us an idea of how we are to relate to things when we're off our cushion, when we're not meditating on emptiness in a more direct way. The post-meditational yoga of illusions like realizing that through though one sees an illusory horse or elephant, that appearance is an illusion because one's sure it does not exist as that. It's kind of a weird sentence. I'm not sure I read it correctly, but the idea is we see things as illusory. They appear to inherently exist, but we know through our investigation that they don't exist that way, and they actually are merely designated, merely imputed. Not denying conventional knowledge, all dharmas appear, but through certainty that they are empty of essence, one sees without effort in post-meditation the object's appearance is elusive. There's no other way to practice illusion. Illusion means that something appears to exist one way, but it actually exists in a different way, like our dream objects. So this is what we practice during the time off the cushion, is try to see that everything is illusory. Rinpoche would often talk about things being like a hallucination. I don't want to go too far to where you think that the truck that's barreling down the middle of the to you in the middle of the road is an illusion and doesn't have any existence at all. Things still exist, right? Remember that. Don't think that things are that illusory that there's no existence at all. Things are like a hallucination, like an illusion. They appear to exist in one way, but they don't exist that way at all. That's what you want to hold when you're off the cushion, is understanding that very paradox that we're dealing with, everything appearing to be real and yet denying that reality in the way that it appears. Things do still have some reality. We're not getting rid of all reality when we negate the real I or the real this or real that. We're negating things down to that very subtle level of things existing as merely imputed. And then we want to hold that view as we go about our business in the world. So let's go on then to the final verse in this section, verse 423. This is the last verse for emptiness. I must gain the good path of calm, meaning calm abiding, and special insight united. Remember, this is the final topic. I set it out as a separate point. This is the union we want to accomplish. Having spent all that time last week talking about developing concentration, calm abiding, and then tonight looking into how we develop this special insight into how things exist and their emptiness of inherent existence, we have to unite those, combining the space-like yoga of equipoise on emptiness and the post-meditational yoga of objects' elusive appearance and perceiving the profound meaning. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So we see that this is kind of the two elements that are involved in our meditation: calm abiding, concentration, and special insight into emptiness. We bring those two together. And then in our post meditation, when we're not meditating on emptiness, to hold the awareness that things are appearing as if they're real, but they're not real in that way at all. Just to point out, it said that you actually have that false appearance in any of your times outside of meditation on emptiness, where you're realizing emptiness directly, until you become a Buddha. When you become a Buddha, you have removed those subtle imprints. Things no longer appear in that fictitious way. So what you're left with then is everything, essentially an omniscient mind that knows the emptiness of all phenomena and knows their conventional establishment and can hold that awareness simultaneously. And you can then know the minds of all other beings and help them and give them the teachings that lead them on that path. So anyway, I'm sure I've short shrifted this section to some degree by virtue of explaining some of it maybe a little more lengthy than I needed to. But so again, this is just a recap of what I just went through. You have these different kind of things that are set out as part of the dharmas, and then the final one on the union of calm abiding and special insight. One little quote from Lama Zopa, just this one screen. Dharma wisdom is the light that eliminates the darkness, the dark shadow of ignorance, the main source of all human afflictions. Dharma philosophy is not Dharma. Doctrine is not Dharma. Religious art is not Dharma. Dharma is not that statue of Lord Buddha on your altar. Dharma is the inner understanding of reality that leads us beyond the dark shadow of ignorance, beyond dissatisfaction. So I just thought it was a beautiful quote because it really points out the whole point of everything the Buddha taught and everything that we've gone through in this course around the Lam Rim is to get us to realize Dharma, that inner understanding of reality. And everything supports that, all the various levels of the stages in the path. So again, how to enter Tantra. This is the final little section. I'm not going to have much time to go through this. Let's go through the two verses that are related to this. Tantra are the more esoteric teachings that are to help you to become a Buddha even more quickly than what you could on the sutra path. So in verse 424, our author says, when I have achieved the ordinary paths of what are often called the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, which we've talked about previously; bodhicitta, which we went into in great detail about how to cultivate that; and view. And view here is shorthand for the correct view of emptiness, informed by dependent arising and so on at that subtlest level. I must please, by means of the three ways of pleasing, a Vajramaster with all the qualifications. Take the four empowerments and grow the four kayas, seeds. Strive in the two-stage yoga of the deep path and quickly attain the stage of unification. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So a number of little things are set out here around Tantra. I couldn't find a definitive teaching on the three ways of pleasing a Vajramaster, but I assume it means the three ways of devoting oneself to our gurus that we talked about much earlier in this course, back in the first or second class. Anyway, those are pleasing them through our material offerings to them, pleasing them through service, and pleasing them through practicing according to their advice. But we then take what are called the four empowerments. These four empowerments are taught within highest yoga tantra, which is said to be the final means of attaining enlightenment. We have to engage in the practices of highest yoga tantra. There are four levels of tantra. It is the supreme of those four. The four empowerments, by the way, are the Vase or Vase, the secret, the wisdom, and the word empowerment. Those are all given as part of a highest yoga tantra empowerment when you feel inclined and ready to do that, and it's being offered by a Vajra master that you want to commit to, then that's what you would do, is you would engage in that ceremony where you've been empowered to achieve Buddhahood by, as it says there, growing the four kayas seeds. The four kayas are the four aspects of a Buddha's experience. We have the kind of in two sides, the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya, the wisdom body, or I'm sorry, truth body, and the form body. But then within those, we have two. Within the truth body, the Dharmakaya, we have the wisdom truth body, which is the omniscient mind of a Buddha, and then the nature truth body, which is the emptiness of that mind, as well as the complete abandonment of all the adventitious defilements in the mind. Over here, we have the two different form bodies of a Buddha, the two Rupakaya, what's called the emanation body and the enjoyment body. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail, but this is taught in Sutra even. When you achieve Buddhahood, you simultaneously have all four of these. Your mind is fully developed, you have that own personal experience of Buddhahood, but then you're involved in the world through the Rupakaya, the form bodies. And Tantra is said to plant the seeds of these in your continuum so that you can develop them much more quickly. Tantra is the path of the resultant path where you think of yourself in the form of the Buddha now through what's called deity yoga, whatever Buddha you've been initiated, empowered into. Then it says strive in the two-stage yoga of the deep path and quickly attain the stage of unification. This is the two stages of the generation stage, where you are actually using your imagination to see yourself in the form of that Buddha and imagine their mandala, the other beings that are in that realm with you. And then eventually in the completion stage, it becomes reality. So in generation stage, it's merely at the level of imagination. But through engaging in very subtle practices, working with subtle energies in the body, you can achieve that reality. That's what Tantra affords. And I'll actually be doing a class on the basic program class on paths and grounds of secret tantra, secret mantra for Thupten Norberling here in Santa Fe in the fall, going into January. But in order to take that class, we're limiting it to those who do have highest yoga tantra empowerment, because that way there's freedom to talk about everything involved in those practices. But Tantra is a huge topic. Most Lamrim texts only touch on it very minimally at the end, kind of like what our text did. Just saying, okay, now that you practice the entire Sutra Lamrim, well, then there's a Lamrim in a sense for Tantra. And Lama Tsongkhapa wrote extensively about how to practice Tantra. And so that's a whole another subject matter. But the sutra is the basis for that, especially those three: renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view of emptiness, the three principal aspects that are the foundation upon which Tantra becomes very effective. So I made it through the text. There's a little conclusion verse, but I want to hold on to that and see if there are questions first. No, it was a lot of words tonight. Sorry for bombarding you with so many words. Yes, Ruth, please. I'm going to take a drink of water.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Is meditating on impermanence helpful in sort of getting to understand the illusionary nature of yourself and self?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. It's said that you do gain a direct realization of impermanence before gaining a direct realization of emptiness. So they're not identical, but they do point to the way that things can appear, which is unchanging, solid, what have you, and yet they have this subtle impermanence all the time. And here we are talking about conditioned phenomena. But everything that is around us is constantly changing. All the physical objects in the world, our bodies, everything is going through this process of continual change. And we are blind to that reality. So there is the same element of something that appears in one way, it can be known to exist in a completely different way. But that's still at a level of conventional truth and not yet at the level of ultimate truth that emptiness is. But it is absolutely a stepping stone to help us to kind of move in that direction. It is said, of course, that if things did exist inherently in the way that we hold them to, that they couldn't change, that impermanence flies in the face of things being inherently existent. So that in and of itself can be a powerful tool to help us to recognize that what we are adhering to in terms of our concept of inherent existence doesn't make sense in a world where there is constant change, subtle change going on with regard to every produced phenomenon. So yeah, it can be very useful. Mhm. Any other? Yes.
And
Mhm.
then meditation on death.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's helps you kind of get to this illusionary.
I mean, I think it can to some degree. I mean, when we start thinking about, well, who dies? You know, we do have this strong sense of an I that we feel is real, that is dying at the time of death, that those two do have some relation. They're not usually taught in that way of like the death being a meditation on emptiness of the I. But if we think about it, it does make a lot of sense, right? That's part of this whole thing of there not being an inherently existent I, is because we do see there's a conditioned I that exists in these two bookends of from when we're conceived to when we die. And that I has no real existence beyond those bookends in terms of that identity, of dawn. And that's where even when the Buddha would talk about, well, when I was born as the Ruru deer and this kingdom of da 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 da. Well, he wasn't meaning that there's this I that is this real person that went through these different, you know, kind of shows of being this particular being and then being some other particular being, whatever. There's no real I through all of that. And so, if we can apply some of that to even our approaching death and understanding death, that there's really nothing that dies because there's no real I to begin with. And there's a continuity of awareness that goes beyond this life. And we will always have a sense of an I on the basis of that, that is just merely imputed, merely designated to whatever basis we have. So, I don't know. I think there is something to be said for death having some correlation to emptiness and those two topics fitting kind of nicely together. But I've never heard, well, I can't say I've never, but I haven't heard many teachings on that topic. Anyone else? Anything from tonight? Or let's go ahead. Oh, Melanie, did you have something?
Sorry. Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
okay, I can't unmute. Oh, but this might be like too long of a question, but it kind of follows off what you guys were just talking about.
Okay.
So, the distinction between, so you talked about the Atman and the soul,
Mhm.
and then you just talked about the awareness that goes on, which I guess I think of as a mind stream, but I
Mhm.
think I've conflated that with soul.
Mhm.
And I wonder how you would not conflate those. How's that?
Yeah, because again, we do see that. I mean, you could get into many different facets of it, but let's just limit it to the whole idea of dependent arising, that there is nothing that is identifiable in that mind stream that is the real I. That is something that is truly existing from its own side as that I. Because once more, if we say that this continuity of awareness, this stream of consciousness is the real I, then nothing else can ever be seen as being related to the I. That is it. That is the I. Well, then, of course, we don't have any experience of the body being the I. We don't have any experience of, having my body, my mind, whatever, all these things that were pointed out. If you identify any one part or any single thing within all of what we are dealing with as a basis for a being, and here we're talking about that stream of awareness that goes through this life into future lives from past lives, well, then you've limited that I to being only that, and you don't have any ability for the I to be seen in any other way validly. And we know that that's not true because we still do think my mind, my I, my body, whatever, all these various things. I think that that's where, when we do a deeper investigation into the mind, we can come to understand that it has its own continuity and cannot be equivalent to the I because we would have some of these consequences. Um, that's one way of approaching it. But of course, the fact that again we have all these different iterations occurring on the basis of this continuity of awareness, so that then in one lifetime it's an elephant, in another lifetime it's a snake, in another lifetime it's a hell being, in another lifetime it's a human, and whatever. I mean, it belies the fact that there's any constant I through all of that process, other than the I that is merely imputed for each of those little segments, a little designation that we give to I when I'm an elephant, and an I when I'm a snake, and an I when I'm a hell being, and what have you. I don't know. I mean, it's one of the harder ones because once more, all of the schools below Prasanghika Madhyamaka point to something, and often it is this idea of the continuity of consciousness that has to be the real I. And we feel like that's what goes from life to life, just like a soul or like
Mhm.
Atman. And we want to kind of pin the identity of an I onto that. But it has the same faults as what we saw when we were going through any of the other grosser aspects of the basis for an I. You know, once you delimit it to that and say, this is what we mean by the I, that is the real I, well, then nothing else can have any relation to the I at all. And we once more see that there's a fluidity to the I because the I is merely imputed, because the I isn't resting upon one single basis. And once more, just to add a little thing about Tantra, and this is why Tantra is effective, is because we do everything within emptiness yoga, within the understanding that things are not fixed in their identity, and that our consciousness can actually become the consciousness of a Buddha. And the aggregates we have, well, they don't like physically transform, but we can see the basis, the subtle winds and so on that we have in this body arising in the form of that deity that we are working with, because things don't have any inherent identity. So we start, I don't know if I've answered your question or
I- It's just there is and maybe again this just might be my not understanding, but there is the sense that there's a uniqueness to
Mm,
that awareness that goes from, you know, from life to life or from being to being or whatever. Um yeah, and so I wonder if
yeah.
I
And
guess I worry that I just keep thinking of that as a soul, you know, and
yeah.
I'm
And,
not
and
seeing
and
it
we're not
accurately.
denying, and we're not even really denying its uniqueness in a sense, because yes, I mean, we don't have anyone else's consciousness. This is
And
our stream
karma,
of consciousness and the karma that
yeah.
goes with it and so on. So, you know, there is that element to it, but it can't be concretized into the I because it still is consciousness in this very subtle way that's going through all of those lifetimes. Yeah, Bill, did you want to add something maybe to help elucidate?
Yeah, I think oh man, I just kind of lost how I was going to phrase it. Um but yeah, hang on. Give me a second. I might come
Sure,
back.
sure. Okay. Um, so anyway, I think that this
Oh,
is
I got it.
okay. Great.
I think I think the karma that goes along with the mind stream gives the illusion of uniqueness to our limited ability right now to see it, you know? Because so much of what we think is unique is just because of the actions we've committed in the past, creating karma that then ripens in the future. And we're like, oh, this person is
Mhm.
experiencing this, but most of that's just our karma. You know,
Sure.
I think that the thing that's on, that carries that karma, I think is much less, much more subtle than that. So that's just my insight into it. I don't know.
No, I think you got a lot. There's a lot to be said for what you shared, Bill, because again, what do we mean by a person, but other than the ripening of that karma into that particular embodiment with all the various things that that person experiences and goes through and what have you. And those, again, when all of this is shed at the end, when we no longer are under the control of any of these factors and we've developed our mind to the degree of a Buddha, yes, His Holiness will still say there is a continuum of mind that became that enlightened being, and that's why might be able to help in particular those beings who you had quite strong karmic connections to, and especially in the lives immediately prior to becoming enlightened. But nonetheless, your mind is somewhat indistinguishable from the mind of any other enlightened being at that point, because they're all omniscient minds that are no longer bound by karma in terms of their experiences. There's no longer that separate sense of a person that's going through all these various things. It's not a universal consciousness, and no Buddhist teacher has ever asserted that I've heard, any teacher I've had. But there is this, you become pure consciousness in a sense that is manifesting according to the connections you have with other beings and the ability to help them according to their karma. So you're still operating in the world of that kind of conditioning, but you are outside of that conditioning yourself. I don't know, in that way, the way Bill's talking about. Yeah. Phew, we have to have another little session sometime to maybe go over any other questions that come up as you continue to work with this text. But let's go ahead and do our little closing here. I do want to just go through the verses that were shared here. And you'll notice that there was a appendix that was added that has this long rim prayer. We might do that at the very end. But it says here, alas, hitherto in this samsara I've circled like a bucket wheel, mostly born in the leisureless states, not meeting with this excellent path. Now I have gained the opportune rebirth and have been received by a holy guru. To spend in leisure this chance, having met the supreme path, is idiotic, to actually, waste this chance that we have. Therefore, I'll cast out activities for this life, as a snake sheds its skin, and striving in the excellent path day and night, attain the essence. Through the mass of virtues thus produced, henceforth in all my lives may I never separate from this Dharma way, and may all beings be freed by this path. So it's a very powerful prayer. Let's just do let's recite this together. This will be our dedication prayer tonight, and then we'll just add a few thoughts onto this. By the two accumulations, vast as space, which I have amassed through lengthy effort at this, may I become a king of conquerors, a guide for all migrators, whose wisdom eyes blinded by ignorance. In all my lives, while I have not attained that too, may Manjughosha lovingly receive me, so that I find the best path, complete in all stages of the teaching, and please the conquerors by practice. Through skill and means, impelled by strong compassion, the main point of the path as I've understood it, may I dispel migrators' mental darkness and uphold the conqueror's doctrine for a long time. In regions where the supreme precious doctrine has not spread, or although it has spread, has declined, with mind strongly moved by great compassion, may I make clear that treasure of benefit and bliss. May the stages of the path to Bodhi, achieved through the marvelous divine acts of conquerors and their sons, grant glory to the minds of those who desire liberation, and long preserve the deeds of the conquerors. May all the people and spirits who set up conditions that favor the excellent path's practice and clear away, oops, I gotta move this for myself. It just says clear away and clear away bad ones, never in all their lives be parted from the pure path which the conquerors have praised. When someone makes effort in the supreme vehicle to practice properly with the 10 Dharma conducts, may the powerful protectors always assist them. May oceans of good fortune fill all the directions. Sarva Mandalam. So again, that was just the Lam prayer that Lama Tsongkhapa composed. It's kind of nice having gone through this whole text of the Lam. So we are dedicating in that way for the Dharma to continue and flourish, for us to be of great benefit to others, to achieve enlightenment quickly for their sake. Let's also dedicate for His Holiness the Dalai Lama's good health and long life, continue to be a beacon of love, compassion, hope in this world for a very long time. Also for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return, and also for the good health and long lives of all of our other precious gurus. Lastly, dedicate for all the beings you're holding in your heart, whatever their situation might be, dedicate for them to be free from suffering, all dissatisfaction, difficulty, and to find perfect peace and happiness. And may all beings have these same results through what we have done here tonight, as well as throughout this course. Sorry for keeping you a bit late, I know, but we had a couple questions and it was good to spend that extra time. And I'm really, again, so appreciative of the opportunity to go through this text with you, and I hope it's been of some benefit and you can use it going forward in your meditation, as Rinpoche always encouraged us to do, particularly this text, Essential Nectar, is one that he recommended frequently for people to use in their meditation. So, and remember, I did pass along that guide. I think Colleen sent that out earlier. That gives you a little schema for how to actually use the verses over the course of 90 some days, and you can cycle through them if you wish, or spend more time on each of them, whatever you want to do. But all right, I'll look forward to seeing you all again sometime, maybe in person, who knows?
Thank you,
We'll see.
Don.
You're very welcome.
We'd just like to say from all of us at OCEL, thank you so much for once again teaching us. A number of people said they really enjoyed this text a lot. We hope you continue to teach, that you have a long, healthy life. And we also hope that you'll please come and teach us again. Let the New Mexico folks and also everyone here already knows, I think, but we have Geshe Sherab coming in about 2.5 weeks.
Right.
With an excellent follow-up to this, which is the 3 principal aspects of the path.
Right.
I'm probably going to create a Zoom link for that for those who can't join us. But this is our first in-person teaching in since 2019. So
Oh
we're
my gosh. Oh,
pretty stoked. And we hope that you will come and teach us in person for the next teaching. So I'll just throw
wow.
that little.
Well, thank you, Bill and Colleen, for your help. And I know so many of you are also quite involved in OSIL and it being there, continuing to be a wonderful source of Dharma in Missoula. And so please keep up the good work. And thank you all again for inviting me to do this. And I'll look forward to working out something to be able to be back with all of you in person, or at least online sometime soon again. But yeah, hopefully in person. So, all right, everyone.